All right, how's it going, guys? We're going to go over my personal site, which uses the Sonata admin bundle, Marionnette on the front end, and also uses the FOS REST bundle as an API for Marionnette. And we're going to go over all that, the services, Symfony. So buckle your seatbelts and let's get started. Um, let's leave this page. We'll go to the home page. We'll just give you a quick tour, and it loads up. This is the preloader screen. Skills screen. You can kind of see that. And you can see all the skills. Jobs. Community. Projects. Right here. You can see the Jasmine test suite that we used. Jasmine test we wrote for the front end. They're all passing. Got 15 of them. And we'll go back, and you can also see that if you click here, that's the API documentation. And we're using the Naomi, I can't pronounce it, but API bundle for that, which basically uses annotations over the controller route functions. And then if you just click here, you can get an example of what you'll get. So pretty cool stuff. We're using Vagrant for the setup. So Vagrant basically controls our, so what we're using to set up our local web server. So I'm just going to Vagrant SSH into the box. And if I go to var www, that's the file that it's stored in. And that's pretty simple and self-explanatory. We also have unit tests for this. So if I go here, console, oops, I'm sorry, my bad, bin php unit -c app. You'll see that these are all the PHP unit tests that was written for it, and we also have end-to-end testing as well, using code exceptions, which is basically a wrapper for Selenium. So that'll run the unit tests, and we'll just say yes, and it'll add all that stuff for us. And we'll say yes. And basically, this end-to-end tests in a headless browser, whether we can log in and not log in, whether all that stuff works. And that's pretty self-explanatory. So you can see all the tests are passing. So that's pretty cool. I'll try to show you. Oh, well, you saw it pass for the unit test, so it doesn't matter. And then for testing, we're also using the LIIP test bundle and SQLite as our testing database, and that allows us to create and delete databases really quickly. So we don't have to use like a full version of MySQL or Postgres or whatever you decide to use for that stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over the Sonata admin. So we're going to go back there, and we're going to go to our config file. And besides doing the normal app kernel stuff, so putting it in the app kernel and just installing it, and you can see we have it right here. And there's really good install directions on the website. You also have to put it in your config.yaml. The title corresponds to, let me just log in real quick, guys. Sorry about that. You'll see what the title will correspond to. This logo corresponds to the Apple logo in the thing. Blocks, we use blocks, which are basically like HTML, JavaScript a block of that or a section of that that you can use to render something. So you could have like little widgets on your admin panel. And then this option right here, HTML validate set to true, means that the browser will allow the browser to validate some things for us, not just rely on the server. So let's go up to here. See, that's the title, the logo. This is a block, FYI. That's the symbol block we're using to render the home page, and we're putting that on the left position. I'll show you where that is as well. So we go to block, setting block, and we're just defining a really simple setting block. That's the twig for it. And the title. So if we go here, we can see that's the twig. We're extending from this, and that's the title of the page, or the title of the page of the goes in the title block. The other thing is that it's also a service. So if you look at, let's see what that service is called really quick. App block dashboard. It is, might be an admin, honestly. Yep, it's an admin. And I'll explain that really quick too. So that's where that class is. So it's defined as a service. Those are the arguments, the type, it's a text block. We want to input the templating service in, and that's the tag. And these admins are just counted as regular services. So we just import them in, not right there, but if I remember correctly, right here. So this is where, so we just load them in like normal services. So it is just a service. I'm just putting it in the admin YAML because it's an admin service. Hope that makes sense. But that's how you would do a very, very simple block, and that's how we control the home page of the Sonata admin. Let's go over a really simple, really simple job entity. So this is probably one of the more simple ones. So you can see that it generates all this for us. We don't have to write any of these table HTML, any of the CSS. Pretty much does it all for you. You can download. You can do multi deletes. All that's configured for you right out of the box. So I clicked OK. You can see it would let me delete it, and I could do a batch delete. So the first thing you want to realize with these is that all of the CRUD pages that you're generating are services. So this admin app job corresponds to that CRUD page. And notice the class is admin app job admin. And the second argument is the entity that it corresponds to. So common naming convention is job, you name it, you can kind of see the naming convention. Also note that site and jobs. So jobs is what it's called. So if I go back here, jobs, and then site is the group. So that basically controls the navigation, if you will. So if we go to our jobs admin, like so, this part controls the table. So the jobs admin corresponds to the jobs entity, which we saw right here, app entity jobs. So this string right here. So let's go there. And you can see that these are fields on the entity. So like title is a field, and title's right here. And you can kind of see that they're all, the first arguments are pretty much all fields for the entity. The next is the type, so we're using text, and then we uppercase, or the first letter of each of these words, and then we add a space here. So notice you don't see start camel case date, you see start space date. And you can also control the format, basically year, month, date. If you don't, you'll get something really funky. Not funky, but just like a timestamp date. So that controls those fields. And then this function right here controls the what's sortable. So title, company, start date, end date, these are all sortable fields. So if I click here, you'll see that it'll sort by company. And then you can configure this to sort, default sort however you want. The other thing that we need to know before we move on to the actual CRUD form is that these actions. So there's a lot of actions you can have. You can have a show action, a delete action. You can even create your own custom actions. But basically, for this one, we just have an edit action. So if we click on that little edit button right here, that will that'll basically take us to where we can edit the page. So that's pretty self-explanatory. The next section is the form section, and these control the forms on the page. So like the fields for the form. So notice that description isn't here, but we have it as a form. So you don't have to. So all the fields you want to add, you put that as a form field. We also have two other fields. So if you look at our base entity, you can see created at and updated at, and these are just updated by life cycles in Doctrine. So you can see our pre-persist will just put in new dates, and every pre-update will just update a new date. So we don't have those fields because they're done for us automatically in our base entity. So that's pretty self-explanatory. This is just a custom field type that Doctrine provides. They don't have to put in the end date. It's optional because you could still be working for somebody. That's why that was left blank. And also notice that the validation groups, that you can have validation groups. You can also do inline validation as well. I prefer validation groups just because I've used them for other things in the past, and they're more makes your code, I think, more reusable. So very similar to just adding validation. In fact, you can even have custom validation. We have one here called job date, which basically corresponds to this. Notice the message, and it's a class constraint, which is why it's on the top. It's just a simple validation thing, and it'll put it on the start date. So let's go to that form, and you can go there by clicking edit or by adding a new. They both will share the same form. And if we click create, it won't let us, so we have to do that. I'm just going to create a bunch of errors just so you can see, and we'll create that default error by saying that and that. So that's going to cause an error on the start date and a few other errors. So notice that your start date must be before the end date. So you can kind of see that the validation triggers like so. And this is all, like I said, done for us out of the box. We don't have to do anything. And if we just put in something, we should be able to create. And so yeah, that makes sense. So I need to pick like get end date that's further out, and that should fix it and create a date in our database. And it does. So if we go back to jobs, you'll see that. Also notice edit job. That word job comes from the toString function in the entity. So we have overridden the toString function from the default PHP toString function because it would have like a bunch of weird numbers and whatnot. So you definitely want to override your toString functions for the entities that you have the Sonata admin control. So that's a simple one. if you can believe it. We're going to go over a more complex one so you guys can kind of see that. And the more complex one we're going to go over is the user admin. And that's right here. And that is defined as a service right here. Now, this third argument corresponds to the controller. So admin user is the controller. And that corresponds to this. And we can see that right here. So those are the two arguments. And notice that this extends the CRUD controller. So it's going to have all the default methods that it would normally have, and then we're just going to add a method to it. So that's kind of how we're doing that. You can see it's in its own group, admin under users. Pretty similar stuff. The configure list is a little bit more confusing, right? So this app admin user reset password, right? This allows you to create your custom buttons. And in that custom button, you'll see a route that gets generated. So in the configure route function, we create a reset password route, which corresponds to this right here, this reset password. And this ID is the user ID. So pretty self-explanatory. We use a service just like you normally would in a controller, called the user manager to reset the password. And a lot of our services are in our components folder. So user manager, and we use JMS DI injection for that. And you can kind of see all the services that has, and calls this function basically. Then we dispatch a reset password event that'll send an email out to the user letting them know their password's been reset. So we'll just go over this stuff really quick. And that is, I think, right here. Where are we? Sorry, there's so much stuff here. User controller, dispatch events, reset password. I think, oh, my bad, guys. It's not email manager. It's in the email listener. And then we basically send the password. This is where it sends it. It uses this email manager, and this is really cool. This is something one of my old bosses taught me, is that it's going to send out all these emails on the kernel terminate event. So what that means is that if you're using FPM, or at the end of the request, basically it'll spin up a separate thread to send out all these emails. So it won't stop the current request from moving forward. So this speeds up your code greatly. But that's basically what the email listener is using. And this is just standard Twig, nothing too special here. Just like you would send an email. We're using, once again, the JMS DY extra bundle to observe the event. We set the priority to 255. I don't remember why, but we basically send out the email, put in the flash bag that the password's been set, which will be displayed on the admin, and then we just redirect to the user list. So that's how that little button would work. So that's how you would add a custom thing to the button. Also, the Sonata admin provides pre-persist and post-persist events. So you can see that set new user will go in and basically generate a password and add the user to it. And what is it? And then send new user email once it's done, post persisting. So once it's saved to the database, this will basically send out an event to create the user. So this is just like doctrine listeners, basically. You can just think of this as doctrine listeners. And we're just hooking into events, and we can get the container and just do things that you would normally do in a constructor. Validation groups are pretty much the same. You can sort by email and ID, just like you did in jobs. Um, so that's pretty cool. The only other one I want to show you is the S3 manager. So the S3 manager uses an S3 client, and is a uh, that is a factory, believe it or not. So this is just an example of a factory. If you've ever wanted to see one, good use for one. So it's a static public function, and it just creates the S3 client. So this is like a really good example of a factory and a really good use case for one. And the way you would define that in Symfony factories is you would just do the service thing. And you can see I've got the factory attributes, the method to call, it's public, and all the Amazon keys, quote unquote, for that factory. So pretty cool stuff there. And we use that factory on the page creation because every page has a picture. So we use S3 to upload the picture. So you can see on page admin, where is it? Is my Oh yeah, it's in a listener. I'm sorry. So we use doctrine listeners for to deal with the picture. So I'll just show you that too. And guys, I know this is a lot to go over. It's a lot of stuff with this framework. So you can see on the pre-update and pre-persist, and we inject the S3 manager and a string helper to help with the strings. So that's how we would upload the picture to the page. Um, this is one case where we did use the validate function, and I think that was because we wanted to basically make basically we wanted to use S3 here. So we wanted to have like this if statement. So if there was a picture for the page, we wanted to validate, else we don't. I think looking back at it right now, we probably could have used the annotations, but this works just fine too. So you can kind of see how to do validation with the page admin. Um, and then you can also have custom templates for the form fields as well. So I didn't want to use like the standard file for the page. I wanted something different. Oh no, I'm sorry, not for the form, but for the thing. I wanted this to show up as a picture. That's what I wanted. So I used the same thing that you saw with the button. Um, so we'll just take a look at that really quick because I'm not explaining it well. Views, admin, picture, template. Yeah, so just the same thing. And this is a what you call it a basically this is an extension in Twig, so you can build your own custom extensions in Twig, and I'll show you that too. Let's see, not there. So I put mine under Twig. I've seen them been put under exceptions, but you can see this is the S3. Basically, it injects the S3 manager, gets the URL for it, and then this name corresponds, and you can kind of see the service tag. So once again, we're using JMS DY extra bundle for all of our services. Um, so that is that in a nutshell. And no validation groups for this one. I think think that's because we're using this instead. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And yeah, you can just use just even with these, you can still just use like your normal Symfony ones. They're all based on the Symfony constraints. So that's our page admin, our page. If your brain isn't dead yet, hopefully it's not. Um, Validators, got some validators. You can kind of review those yourself. So the next thing we need that I want to go over, as well as the settings form, and this is just like a custom form with settings for the website. So you can also use custom forms in your Sonata admin as well. So that corresponds to this form right here. So you can kind of see this is like a custom form. This isn't like connected to a database per se. And that, and then that gets loaded up right here. So that we basically get rid of all the routes and we add a manage route. And then we use this settings.html. So if we go to, you kind of see the twig for this right here, and this is the form. So you can just use a normal form, and sometimes that's appropriate for certain things because you're not always going to be building pages that map to a database table. Sometimes you'll build like a custom admin page that won't. So that's basically how you would do that. You would basically clear the routes, add, manage, and then set the manage template to that. So these are just examples. I know I'm not explaining it thoroughly, but there's just so much in this site that I have to move quickly, and I apologize for that. So that's the admin part, and let's just quickly go over the API part because that is pretty quick and painless. I think it is. So this uses the I'll have the spelling for you. But basically, what's going on is that if you look at the controllers and the API controllers, we'll take the community. You can see I'm using dependency injection to inject the community repository, and I'm using all these annotations. Param converter basically will take the variable community and turn it into an entity. So if you don't specify the type, it'll assume it's an ID. And then right here, this view, this is the important thing. We will serialize, use these serialization groups for the view. You have to use the default one, this one right here, because we're using HADOS. And we're using the HADOS Bazinga bundle. So if we look at community, which is right here, you can see that this is the HADOS Bazinga bundle, and that just requires that for serialization. This exclusion tells which groups you want to serialize this with. So maybe that is wrong. But basically, you can see that if you look at the links, you can see the HADOS. So this right here, that's HADOS, basically telling you where it is. So if we went to the one under it, which is 2, hit 2, you would see the HADOS, and then you'd see all. The self, and then you'd see it all. Then you'd see it all, which is corresponds to this one right here. So we use serialization groups, the JMS serializer. This just basically defines what the name of the variable is, the type, data type, which is an integer, is required, D plus, and that's just basically referring to the ID it's going to be put in. And yeah, so this is all just for basic documentation, this API doc. And that's what we use to communicate with Backbone Marionnette. So these are like the APIs that we're using. We're also using some for the APIs, some event listeners to help insert some things. So this one, we get the object, and instead of sending them just like in S3, whatever, we get we send them the URL. So you can have pre-serialization and post-serialization events. And we basically, for this page, we get the picture for the page. So we insert that in the pre-serialization event for the page listener. So you can use that as well. Also use a menu listener. What is that for? Oh, that's to add settings to the menu. So this is like the new way of adding settings, and that's a service as well, I believe. So you can look in our admin.yaml file for that. But you can kind of see that this all generates really nice documentation. If I can get Chrome back up, let's see. So yeah, this generates really nice documentation. So now we're into the Marionnette part. The way I like to write Marionnette is to start with the models and the collections and write some tests for them just to make sure they work. This Marionnette application basically puts all of the JavaScript and everything into to the JS folder, and we basically use Brauer, and Brauer is like a package manager for JavaScript, and that we basically tell Brauer in the Brauer.rrc, which is not showing up on my web. I'll just cat it for you so you can see it. Should be in the commit file. But it's basically putting it in the third party like so. So that puts that in the third party, and then main is where the actual application starts. This required JS basically allows us to do dependency injection. I think a better way to go might be browserify, but required JS is more documented in the Marionnette space. So, but I think people are going to be switching to browserify pretty soon. So this is just basic required JS stuff. This points to the folders that Brauer downloads for us. This is the base URL. Like so, we're also using SAS, which is which basically is a way to write CSS with variables and kind of shortens things and makes things a little bit neater and nicer. So you don't have to like worry about all the browser specific stuff. And it works very well with Twitter Bootstrap, which is what we're using. The other thing that is important to note is that we're using Grunt. If I can find my Grunt file, that's Gulp. We're using Gulp as well. We're using Grunt. No, we're not using Grunt. I'm sorry. So, but if you wanted to uglify the CSS, you would have to use Grunt. Don't try to use Gulp. Gulp will be a pain in the butt as far as trying to uglify this. So, what I mean by that is that if you look at my homepage, I'm going to inspect element, and we're just going to look at network, and we're going to refresh the page. because I haven't uglified anything, and I didn't do that because just wasn't didn't seem necessary. You can kind of see that it's requiring like all these JS files. So if you want to do that using Marionnette, probably the better way to go is to use Browserify. But if you're going to use I should say, if you're going to use require.js, you're pretty much going to have to use Grunt. But if you use Browserify, you can use Gulp, and Gulp is a better solution because it builds faster, builds a lot faster. But this is our Gulp file. It does our compilation for our SAS and all that good stuff. Okay. So believe it or not, this is kind of the simple part. So this is our models. Nothing too fancy. I think they're just page. So basically, they're just almost reflections of our back end. Not complete, but almost. We have our router.js. These are basically our routes. So this is where we would put all of our routing stuff. So where we want stuff to go. This pay app.vent.trigger page home will basically go into basically correspond to here. It'll trigger that event and it'll redirect them. It'll get the homepage information and redirect them. In certain pages, you have to get more information. So take the jobs pages. We not only need to fetch the actual page that has the picture of the jobs, but we also need to fetch the job collection as well. So we use this .when, and that's basically using promises and defers and all that stuff. So maybe not the most scalable way to write this, but definitely a way to write this. It's kind of what we're demonstrating. Main is the starting point of the app. So that loads the require.js and starts the app. Views are pretty simple. Nothing too fancy there. For templating, we're just using underscore. So you can kind of see how that works. So this is a picture variable coming from the model. We're also using, let me see, routing.js, which is another really cool bundle that allows you to let JavaScript have access to your routes. So that's how we're getting the URLs for it. So that's all pretty no, I wouldn't say self-explanatory, but ugh. But yeah, I mean, basically, if you know Marionnette, you know certain views like take the jobs view, right? That's a composite view, and that will have a list of jobs. So we go here. So composite view is basically like a collection view. So you can see like this is part of the composite view, and then these are like the collections. So we look here. And that would be like the child view. So that's pretty interesting. You'd have to like really like read up on Marionnette to really understand all this. It can get pretty confusing. Basically, we use a different require.js for the different config for the Jasmine boot, and we also just put all of our. We just have 3 spec files, so we just run them, and that's basically how you would run JS spec for Backbone Marionnette. This video is getting like way too long. There's only one other thing I want to show you, and that is tests, and just this really cool bundle, really quick, and that would be want to see if I can find one. That is not it. Let me see. Sorry, guys. So for this one, we can, this will just load up your data fixtures, and this uses the LIIP functional test bundle. So if you ever need to test with a database, you want to create a quick SQL database, destroy it, this stuff does, and it'll create it and destroy it, basically in sync or basically on time. So this uses data fixtures. You can research that and you can research all that. But that is this personal website in a nutshell. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a great day. And I'm going to close the video out here. But I will catch you on the flip side.